My stepdad pretended to be sick so I couldn't go to college. My stepdad pretended to be sick for 2 years so I couldn't leave for college. When my mom passed away from cancer, I thought Rick and I would grieve together. He'd been in my life since I was 12. We weren't close, but I thought he cared about me. I thought we were family. I was completely wrong. A few months after Mom died, Rick started gaining weight. A lot of weight. He stopped going to work, stopped leaving the house, stopped doing anything except eating takeout and watching TV. Within a year, he could barely walk to the bathroom alone. I became his full-time caretaker. I cooked his meals, cleaned his room, helped him to the toilet. My entire senior year disappeared into taking care of him. I lost my friends because I couldn't hang out anymore. I lost my social life because I always smelled like cleaning supplies. I lost everything except him. When my MIT acceptance letter arrived that April, I cried for an hour. This was my chance, my escape, a future that was finally mine. But when I told Rick, his face went pale. He started clutching his chest and gasping for air. The paramedics said his weight was crushing his organs. The doctor pulled me aside and said he needed round-the-clock care or he wouldn't survive the year. Just defer 1 semester, Rick begged from his hospital bed. Just until I get better. I can't lose you too. What kind of person leaves their dying family behind? So I called MIT. They said my spot would wait. 1 semester became 2. Then a full year. Every single time I tried to make plans, something happened. The night before spring enrollment, Rick collapsed in the bathroom. Turned out to be gas, but I'd already missed the deadline. When fall registration opened, he had a panic attack so severe he forgot his own name. I became his everything. His nurse, his cook, his therapist. I was showering a grown man, washing his sheets when he had accidents, staying up all night when he couldn't sleep. My hands were raw from bleach. I hadn't slept through a full night in over a year. Then MIT called in February. My advisor's voice was kind but firm. This is your final chance. If you're not here by fall, we have to give your spot away. That night, I told Rick I was leaving. I had to. This was my last shot at the life I'd worked so hard for. His face went white. His breathing got shallow. My chest, he gasped. I need the hospital. But something felt off. Maybe it was how he kept glancing at my face between gasps. Maybe it was how his panic seemed perfectly timed. I'd seen this performance before. While he was in the bathroom, I found his medical folder in the kitchen drawer. I flipped through his recent test results, my hands shaking. His heart was fine. Had been for 6 months. The cardiologist's notes said his cardiac function was completely normal. I stared at those papers until the words blurred. Then I heard his voice through the bathroom door, clear and calm, not breathless at all. Yeah, she's staying. Bought the whole thing again. Few more years and she'll age out of those college programs. Then she'll have no choice but to stay and take care of me forever. My entire body went cold. I pressed my ear to the door, barely breathing. Nah, she doesn't suspect anything. She actually thinks I might die. I must have made a noise because he stopped talking. When he came out, he was back to wheezing and clutching his chest. I smiled and helped him to bed like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Over the next few days, I searched his room while he slept. I found weight gainer supplements hidden in his closet. His browser history had searches for how to gain weight fast and maintaining obesity for disability benefits. There was even a notebook with weight goals and target dates, meal plans designed to keep him heavy enough that I couldn't leave. The last entry was dated that week. She almost left. Need to hit 350 by March. I stood there surrounded by evidence that this man had been destroying my life on purpose, and I felt nothing. Just empty. The next morning, I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or cry or ask him why. I just packed a bag while he was sleeping, called my aunt who lived 3 states away, and walked out the front door. Rick called me 43 times that first day. Voicemails begging, then threatening, then sobbing. I blocked his number after the 10th one. I'm living with my aunt now. I missed my chance at MIT, but I start at the state university next fall. It's not the dream I had, but it's mine. Nobody else's. Sometimes I wonder if Rick ever cared about me at all, or if I was just convenient. But I've stopped trying to figure him out. Some people don't deserve that much of your energy. I finally have my life back. And that's enough. I spent my first full day at Kara's apartment unpacking my single bag, which didn't take long since I'd left with almost nothing. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, my toothbrush, and my laptop. That was it. That was everything I owned from 2 years of being trapped. I sat on the guest room bed staring at my pathetic pile of belongings and tried to process that I actually got out. My hands kept shaking every time I thought about Rick waking up and finding me gone. Kara knocked softly around noon and brought me a sandwich without asking if I was hungry. She set it on the nightstand and asked if I needed anything, her voice gentle and careful like I might break. I shook my head and she left without pushing me to talk. She came back 3 hours later with a glass of water and some fruit, checking on me the same way, giving me space but making sure I knew she was there. I ate the sandwich after she left because I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something I didn't have to cook myself. It tasted better than anything I'd made in Rick's kitchen. That night, I lay awake in Kara's guest room staring at the ceiling, my phone sitting silent on the nightstand. It was the first time in years the screen wasn't lighting up with Rick's name. I'd blocked his number before I even got on the bus to come here, deleting 43 voicemails without listening to most of them. The quiet felt wrong. My body kept tensing up, waiting to hear him yelling my name from the other room, demanding I help him to the bathroom or bring him food or fix his pillows. Every small sound made my heart race. The house settling, the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside. I kept expecting to hear his voice calling for me, that whiny tone he used when he wanted something. I must have checked my phone 15 times to make sure I'd really blocked him, that he couldn't reach me anymore. The silence should have felt peaceful, but it just felt weird and wrong, like something was missing even though what was missing was terrible. The next morning, Kara found me in the kitchen at 6, already awake because I couldn't sleep past sunrise anymore. She made coffee and sat across from me at her small table, wrapping her hands around her mug. She asked what my plans were for the future, her tone careful but direct. I told her about MIT, about how I'd missed my last chance, about the state university that said I could start in fall. The words came out flat and emotionless, like I was reading someone else's story. Kara listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said I could stay as long as I needed. She offered to help me with enrollment, to drive me anywhere I needed to go, to co-sign for loans if I needed it. I started crying into my coffee, these stupid, grateful tears I couldn't control. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I realized this was the first time in 2 years someone had offered to help me without expecting anything back. I called the state university admissions office that afternoon, my hands sweating as I dialed. A man named Landon Shaw answered, and I explained I needed to confirm my deferred enrollment for fall semester. My voice shook the whole time because part of me expected him to say they'd given my spot away, that I'd waited too long, that I'd lost this chance too. But he was kind, his voice warm through the phone. He said my spot was still waiting and he'd email me the paperwork I needed to complete. He asked if I needed help with anything else, and I almost started crying again because people kept being nice to me, and I wasn't used to it anymore. He said to call him directly if I had questions, and he gave me his extension. I hung up and stared at my phone, at the email notification that popped up 2 minutes later with the enrollment forms attached. This was real. This was actually happening. That afternoon, Kara drove me to the phone store because Rick had started calling her number trying to reach me. She'd ignored the first few calls, but he kept going, leaving messages that got more desperate each time. The kid at the phone store set me up with a new number, transferring my contacts and data while we sat in the parking lot. When he handed my phone back with the new number active, I felt this small surge of power in my chest. Rick couldn't contact me anymore. He didn't have this number. He couldn't call or text or leave voicemails begging me to come back. I was unreachable, and that felt like the first real control I'd had over my own life in forever. Kara asked if I wanted to get dinner to celebrate, and I said yes, even though my stomach was too tight to eat much. We went to a diner and I ordered pancakes because I could, because nobody was waiting at home for me to cook their dinner first. That evening, Rick's sister Winter called Kara's landline. I was walking past the phone when it rang and I picked it up without thinking. Winter's voice hit me like cold water, sharp and angry. She launched right into it, saying Rick was family and I'd abandoned him when he needed me most. She said he was devastated, that he couldn't eat or sleep, that he might die without proper care. She said my mom would be ashamed of me for leaving him alone like this. Her words came fast and mean, each one designed to dig into the guilt I was already carrying. She said I was selfish and cruel. That family takes care of family no matter what. She said Rick loved me and I'd thrown that away. She kept going, her voice getting louder, saying I owed him everything after he took care of me when Mom died. I hung up on her mid-sentence, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. Then I started crying, these horrible gasping sobs I couldn't control. My chest felt tight and my breathing got shallow and I slid down the wall to sit on the kitchen floor. Kara found me there and wrapped her arms around me without asking what happened. She held me while I sobbed, rubbing my back and saying it was okay, that I was safe. When I could finally talk, I told her what Winter said. Kara's face went hard. She said what Rick did was abuse, that he manipulated and controlled me for 2 years. She said my mom would want me safe and free, not trapped taking care of a man who was faking being sick. She said Winter didn't know the full story, that she only knew Rick's version where he was the victim. Kara kept holding me until I stopped shaking, and then she unplugged the landline so nobody could call it anymore. The next few days, I barely left the guest room. I'd come out for meals when Kara called me, but mostly I stayed in bed, alternating between feeling nothing and feeling everything. Sometimes I was numb, staring at the wall for hours without really thinking. Other times I was so angry I wanted to scream, punching the pillow and crying until my throat hurt. I kept replaying that moment when I heard Rick on the phone, his voice clear and calm as he bragged about trapping me. Each time I remembered it, I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. All those fake emergencies, all those perfectly timed panic attacks. How had I fallen for it? How had I believed him for so long? I should have known. I should have checked his medical records months ago. I'd wasted 2 years of my life because I was too trusting, too guilty, too stupid to see what he was doing. Kara knocked on my door one afternoon and came in carrying 2 mugs of tea. She sat on the edge of the bed and said I might want to talk to a professional about everything I'd been through. I immediately resisted, shaking my head and saying I was fine. Talking to a therapist felt like admitting I was broken, like I couldn't handle this on my own. Kara set down her tea and looked at me directly. She said processing trauma with help wasn't weak, it was smart. She said what Rick did to me was serious, and dealing with it alone would be harder than dealing with it with support. She said she'd help me find someone good, someone who specialized in this kind of thing. I didn't answer right away, but I didn't say no either. I started filling out the university enrollment paperwork that night, working through the forms one section at a time. Most of it was straightforward until I got to the emergency contact section. The blank line stared at me, waiting for a name and phone number. Rick had been listed as my guardian after Mom died, his information on every form and document. The idea of putting anyone's name in that space made my chest tight with anxiety. What if they turned out like Rick? What if I was making another mistake? What if whoever I listed used it against me somehow? My hand hovered over the paper, pen shaking, unable to write anything down. I closed the forms and shoved them aside, my breathing too fast. I'd finish them later. I just needed more time. I looked up from the forms and found Kara standing in the doorway holding 2 mugs of tea. She set one down next to me and glanced at the blank emergency contact line. She said quietly that she could be my emergency contact if I wanted, that she'd be honored to have her name there. My eyes burned and my throat got tight because I realized she was the only family I had who actually wanted to help me instead of trap me. I picked up the pen with shaking hands and wrote her name and phone number in careful letters, and when I finished, she squeezed my shoulder without saying anything else. A week after leaving, I finally opened my laptop and logged into my email for the first time since I'd walked out. The inbox loaded slowly, and I watched the number climb. 47 unread messages, all from Rick. I scrolled through the subject lines without opening any of them. Please come home. We need to talk. I'm worried about you. You're killing me. I don't understand why you left. I'm calling the police to report you missing. The progression from begging to threatening made my stomach hurt, but I also felt weirdly detached, like I was reading emails meant for someone else. I took screenshots of every single one before I showed my laptop to Kara. She read through them silently, her jaw getting tighter with each message, and then she said we should document everything in case we needed a restraining order. We created a folder on my desktop and saved screenshots of all his emails and the voicemails I hadn't deleted yet. Seeing the manipulation laid out in black and white like evidence made something shift in my chest, made me feel less crazy for leaving, like I had proof now that I wasn't overreacting or being cruel. That afternoon, Kara took me shopping for basics since I'd left with almost nothing. We drove to Target and she handed me a cart, telling me to get whatever I needed. Walking through the aisles, picking out my own shampoo and body wash and clothes felt completely surreal, like I was playing at being a normal person who made their own choices about simple things. I stood in front of the shampoo section for 10 minutes just staring at all the options because Rick had always bought the cheapest bulk bottles and I'd never thought about what I actually liked. Kara waited patiently while I picked out things that smelled good, and when we got to the clothing section, I chose shirts and colors I actually wanted, instead of just grabbing whatever was on sale. At the checkout, I felt guilty about how much everything cost until Kara reminded me that taking care of myself wasn't selfish or wasteful. When we got back to the apartment, I submitted my enrollment confirmation to the state university through their online portal. I filled in all my information and uploaded the required documents, my hands sweating the whole time because I kept waiting for something to go wrong. When I hit submit, the page loaded for what felt like forever, and then an automated email arrived saying I was officially registered for fall semester. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, spreading through my whole body like warmth. I cried in front of my laptop, actual tears running down my face because something was finally going right and I was actually going to college even though it wasn't MIT. The next day, Kara helped me apply for financial aid, sitting next to me while I worked through the forms. We got to the section about parent contribution and college savings, and Kara asked if I knew about the fund Rick mentioned. I said he'd told me there was money saved from my mom's life insurance, but we couldn't touch it until I enrolled somewhere. Kara's face went hard, and she pulled up the financial aid portal to check for any linked accounts. There was nothing. No fund, no savings, no money at all. Rick had been lying about that too, probably to make me feel more obligated to stay because I thought he was managing money for my future. I stared at the empty account screen and felt stupid all over again for believing him. 2 days later, the financial aid advisor emailed back saying I qualified for significant aid as an independent student since my mother was deceased and my guardian situation was complicated. The aid package wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was more than I expected, enough that I could actually afford to go if I worked part-time. I read the email 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly, that I wasn't misreading the numbers or missing some condition that would take it away. 2 weeks after leaving, I finally felt ready to explore Kara's neighborhood instead of hiding in the guest room. I walked to a nearby coffee shop and ordered something I'd never tried before, then sat outside with a book I'd borrowed from Kara's shelf. The simple act of being in public without worrying about rushing home, without calculating how long Rick could be alone, without feeling guilty for taking time for myself, felt like actual freedom. I sat there for 2 hours just reading and drinking coffee, and watching people walk by, and nobody knew who I was or what I'd escaped from. My phone rang while I was walking back, and I answered without checking the number, assuming it was Kara. Rick's voice came through the speaker saying he was in the hospital again, that he'd collapsed, and the doctor said it was serious. My stomach dropped with old panic before my brain caught up, and I remembered his medical records showing his heart was fine, remembered the notebook with weight goals, remembered him bragging on the phone about trapping me. I hung up without saying anything and blocked the new number, my hands shaking but my resolve solid. He'd probably gotten it from Winter somehow, maybe convinced her I needed to know he was dying. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the whole thing. That evening I called the state university and asked to speak with someone about campus counseling services. The woman who answered transferred me to an admissions counselor named Landon, who said all students got free sessions with licensed therapists through the Student Health Center. He was helpful and patient while I explained that I needed someone who specialized in family trauma, and he said he could connect me with a therapist who had experience with that before the semester started if I wanted to get ahead of things. I said yes and wrote down the contact information he gave me, feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to explain everything from scratch to some random counselor who might not understand. I scheduled my first therapy session with the counselor for 2 weeks out, then sat at Kara's kitchen table staring at my laptop screen. She came in with coffee and set a mug down next to me before sitting across from me with her own cup. She asked if I was okay, and I told her I was just thinking about what comes next, about how I needed to start building an actual life instead of just hiding from the old one. She nodded and said she'd been thinking about that too, then suggested I might want to look into getting a part-time job to start saving money and regain some independence. The idea made my stomach twist because I hadn't worked anywhere except taking care of Rick, hadn't filled out an application or sat through an interview or done any of the normal things people my age did to earn money. But I knew she was right that I needed to build my own life, needed to prove to myself that I could function like a normal person who supported themselves. I opened a new tab and started searching for entry-level jobs in the area, clicking through listings for retail stores and coffee shops and restaurants. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Most of them wanted experience I didn't have or availability I couldn't promise, but I bookmarked a few that seemed possible and told myself I'd apply tomorrow when my hands stopped shaking. The next morning, I sat down with my laptop again and forced myself to create a resume even though I had almost nothing to put on it. I kept the past 2 years vague, just saying I'd been helping family after my mom died, and I listed some volunteer work I'd done in high school before everything fell apart. I applied to 6 different places, attaching my sad little resume to each application, and trying not to think about how pathetic it looked compared to what other people my age probably had. And 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer because I was still scared it might be Rick calling from somewhere new. But I picked up on the 4th ring, and a woman's voice asked if I was available for an interview at the bookstore downtown. I said yes immediately, my heart suddenly racing, and she scheduled me for the next afternoon at 2. I spent the rest of that day and all of the next morning anxiously preparing for basic questions about my availability. An experience, practicing answers in front of the bathroom mirror that made me sound like a normal person, instead of someone who'd spent 2 years as a prisoner in her own house. Kara helped me pick out an outfit that looked professional but not too formal, and she drove me to the bookstore 20 minutes early so I could sit in the car and breathe and remind myself that this was just an interview, not a life or death situation. The manager turned out to be a woman maybe 5 years older than me with bright red hair and an easy smile. She asked about my experience, and I gave her the sanitized version about helping family after my mom died, and she didn't push or ask uncomfortable questions, just nodded and moved on to asking about my availability and whether I liked reading. The interview lasted maybe 15 minutes, and at the end she said I seemed like a good fit, and asked if I could start next week. I accepted immediately, probably too eagerly, and she laughed and said she liked my enthusiasm. Walking out of that bookstore, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, like I'd just proven to myself that I could do something normal, something that didn't involve Rick or his fake illness, or the cage he'd built around me. My first day at the bookstore was the following Tuesday, and I showed up 15 minutes early because I was terrified of being late. The manager showed me around, introduced me to the other employees who were mostly college students and recent graduates, and explained the basics of the register and the inventory system. Everyone treated me normally, asked where I was from and what I liked to read, and nobody knew about Rick or what I'd escaped from, which felt like the cleanest slate I'd ever had. By the end of my shift, my feet hurt and my brain was tired from learning so many new things, but it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from actually doing something instead of just surviving. I worked 3 shifts that first week and started to relax into the routine, started to remember what it felt like to have coworkers and small talk, and a reason to leave the house that wasn't doctor's appointments or grocery shopping for someone else. 3 weeks after I'd left Rick's house, I was working an afternoon shift when my phone buzzed with a call from Kara. I stepped into the back room to answer, and she said I needed to come home right away, her voice tight with something that sounded like fear. I told my manager I had a family emergency, and she let me go immediately, and I practically ran the 6 blocks back to Kara's apartment building. When I got there, she was standing at her living room window looking down at the street, and when I came up beside her, she pointed down to the front steps where Rick was struggling to climb up, his massive body heaving with each step. A neighbor had called up to warn her that a very large man was asking which unit she lived in, and we watched from 3 floors up as he made it to the top step and leaned against the railing to catch his breath. Kara grabbed her phone and called the police while I backed away from the window, my whole body starting to shake. I went into the bathroom and locked the door, sitting on the floor with my back against the tub while my heart pounded so hard I thought I might actually pass out. I could hear Kara talking to the 911 operator in the living room, giving the address and explaining that her niece had a stalker who'd shown up at the building. The minutes dragged by and I focused on breathing, on not throwing up, on reminding myself that Rick couldn't get to me up here even if he made it to the 3rd floor. Then I heard sirens outside and Kara called through the bathroom door that the police were here. I stayed where I was, listening to footsteps on the stairs and voices in the hallway. And then I heard Rick's voice from outside, crying and pleading that he just wanted to talk to me, that he was sorry, and he needed me to come home. The officers told him he needed to leave, or they'd arrest him for trespassing, and Rick kept crying and saying he had nowhere else to go, that I was all he had left. Eventually the voices faded, and I heard car doors slamming, and Kara knocked on the bathroom door to tell me he was gone. I opened the door, and she pulled me into a hug while I shook against her shoulder. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the apartment door, and Kara checked the peephole before opening it to let in one of the officers who'd responded. He asked me some questions about my relationship with Rick, and I explained the whole situation while Kara pulled up the folder on her laptop with screenshots of his emails and saved voicemails. The officer looked through everything, his expression getting harder as he read, and then he said we should seriously consider filing for a restraining order given Rick's escalating behavior and his showing up at the building today. He gave us information about how to file and said the documented evidence would help our case, then told us to call immediately if Rick showed up again. After he left, I sat on Kara's couch feeling numb and exhausted, and she sat next to me and said we'd go to the courthouse tomorrow to start the paperwork. The next morning, Kara drove us downtown to the courthouse and we found the right office for restraining order applications. A clerk gave us a thick stack of forms and directed us to a table where we could fill them out. I stared at the first page asking me to describe the relationship and the threatening behavior, and I felt sick having to write it all down, having to admit in official legal language that I'd been stupid enough to fall for Rick's manipulation for 2 whole years. Kara put her hand on my arm and reminded me that I wasn't stupid, that Rick had been calculating and deliberate in his abuse, and that filing this order was me taking back control. I filled out every form, describing Rick's fake illness and his intentional weight gain, and his phone call admission, and his 43 calls the day I left, and his showing up at the apartment building yesterday. The clerk reviewed the paperwork when I turned it in and said it looked complete, and she gave me a date for the hearing in 2 weeks. As we were leaving the courthouse, Kara mentioned that she'd found a lawyer who did free consultations for abuse cases, and she'd already made us an appointment for that afternoon if I was up for it. I said yes because I figured we should get as much help as we could. And a few hours later, we were sitting in a small office across from a woman in her 50s, who reviewed all my documentation with careful attention. She said I had a strong case for the restraining order based on Rick's documented behavior and the evidence of his manipulation, and then she paused and said, I might also want to consider reporting Rick's disability fraud to the proper authorities. The words hit me like a punch, and I felt my stomach drop, felt that old guilt rising up even though I knew Rick deserved whatever consequences came his way. The lawyer explained that I didn't have to decide right away, but Rick's fake illness scheme had likely involved defrauding insurance companies or government benefits programs, and that was a serious crime that could result in criminal charges and financial penalties. She said reporting it wasn't vindictive, it was holding him accountable, and potentially preventing him from doing the same thing to someone else. I told her I needed time to think about it, and she nodded, saying the offer stood whenever I was ready, and that she'd help me through the process if I decided to move forward. I walked into the counseling center on a Tuesday morning with my stomach in knots. The waiting room had soft chairs and peaceful paintings on the walls, but I couldn't relax. A woman came out to greet me, mid-40s with dark hair pulled back and kind eyes. She introduced herself as Sabine and led me to her office. The space was small but comfortable, with a couch and tissues on the side table. She settled into her chair and asked what brought me in today. I started talking, and the words came out choppy at first. I told her about Rick and the fake illness and the 2 years I spent as his caretaker. I explained about finding the medical records and the weight gain supplements and his phone call where he admitted trapping me. Sabine listened without interrupting, just nodding occasionally and keeping her eyes on mine. When I finished, she said what Rick did was abuse and manipulation, using those exact words. Something in my chest loosened when she said it. A professional was telling me I wasn't crazy or overreacting. She said we'd work on processing the trauma and building boundaries, and I left feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The restraining order hearing got scheduled for 2 weeks out. Kara sat me down at her kitchen table that evening and said we needed to prepare. She asked what I planned to say to the judge, and I froze because I hadn't thought about actually speaking in court. We spent the next hour practicing. I stumbled over my words at first, getting emotional when I described Rick's control. Kara reminded me to stick to facts and timeline. I grabbed a notebook and started writing everything down. Rick's initial weight gain after Mom died. His first fake medical crisis when I got the MIT letter. The bathroom collapse before spring enrollment. The panic attack before fall registration. Finding the medical records showing his heart was fine. The phone call where he admitted his plan. His 43 calls the day I left. His appearance at Kara's building. Writing it all out made the pattern obvious. This wasn't a sick man making mistakes. This was calculated manipulation over 2 years. I filled 6 pages with dates and details so I wouldn't forget anything when I got nervous in court. My first day working at the bookstore was the following Monday. The manager showed me how to use the inventory system and where everything was shelved. I spent most of my shift in the back organizing new arrivals. During my afternoon break, I wandered into the self-help section to browse. My eyes landed on a title about narcissistic parents, and I pulled it off the shelf. I sat down on the floor right there between the aisles and started reading. The first chapter described manipulation tactics, and every single one matched things Rick had done. Fake emergencies to control behavior, guilt trips about family obligation, making the victim feel responsible for the abuser's well-being. I flipped to the section on recovery, and it talked about how victims often don't realize they're being abused until they're out. I sat there for my entire 15-minute break reading page after page that described my life with Rick. It was validating and devastating at the same time. Validating because professionals recognize this pattern as abuse. Devastating because I'd lived it for 2 years without seeing it. That evening, Kara called me into her office looking upset. She showed me her email inbox where Rick had sent her 5 long messages. I read through them feeling sick. He wrote about how much he loved me and how he only wanted to keep me safe after losing Mom. He painted himself as a grieving man who made mistakes out of love and fear. He said he was sorry for being controlling, but he couldn't bear to lose another family member. The emails were full of phrases about how much he missed me and how the house felt empty without me. He talked about Mom and how proud she'd be if I came home to help him. He even mentioned specific memories from when I was younger, good times we'd had together. Reading them made me feel guilty for a moment before I remembered the weight gain supplements and the notebook with his plan written out. Kara asked if I wanted her to block his email address, and I said yes, immediately. At my next therapy session, I showed Sabine the emails Rick sent to Kara. She read through them carefully, and then looked at me. She explained these were classic manipulation tactics designed to make me doubt my own reality. The loving language and family memories were meant to make me feel guilty for leaving. The emphasis on grief and fear was meant to excuse his controlling behavior. She said abusers often rewrite history to make their actions seem reasonable. We practiced responses I could use when I felt myself weakening. I wrote them down in my phone. Rick's love involved trapping me with lies. Real family doesn't manipulate and control. I'm not responsible for his choices or feelings. Sabine had me repeat these statements until they felt natural. She said the guilt would come in waves, but I needed to remind myself of the truth every time. 4 weeks after leaving Rick's house, I drove to the state university for new student orientation. Kara dropped me off at the main campus building where hundreds of incoming students were gathering. I checked in and got my orientation packet with a campus map and schedule. Walking around with all these other freshmen felt strange. They were excited and nervous about normal things like picking majors and joining clubs. I was excited too, but also carrying this weight they couldn't see. I should have been at MIT 2 years ago doing this same thing. Instead, I was here because Rick stole that chance from me. I tried to focus on being grateful I made it to college at all. The orientation leader gathered us in groups and started explaining campus resources. I listened and took notes and tried to feel like I belonged here. During the campus tour, I ended up walking next to a guy named Mateo who seemed friendly and relaxed. He started asking the orientation leader questions about the engineering program, and I mentioned I was thinking about psychology. He asked if I'd taken gap years because I looked older than most of the group. I gave him the version I'd practiced with Sabine about helping family after my mom died. He didn't push for details, just said that sounded rough and he was sorry about my mom. Then he asked if I wanted to join his group for lunch in the dining hall. I said yes, even though my instinct was to say no and hide. We ate with 3 other students and they talked about their high schools and summer plans. I mostly listened, but Mateo kept including me in the conversation, asking my opinion on things. It felt normal and easy in a way I'd forgotten was possible. 2 weeks later, the restraining order hearing arrived and I woke up feeling like I might throw up. Kara made me eat toast even though my stomach was churning. We drove to the courthouse and I clutched my notebook with all the timeline details I'd written down. In the bathroom before the hearing, I actually did throw up. I rinsed my mouth and stared at myself in the mirror trying to calm down. Kara found me there and squeezed my hand. She reminded me I had evidence and truth on my side. We walked into the courtroom and Rick was already sitting with his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow. Or maybe I just saw him differently now. The judge called the hearing to order, and I felt my heart pounding, so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The judge asked me to explain why I was requesting the restraining order. I stood up and my voice shook at first, but I pushed through. I described Rick's fake illness and how he gained weight on purpose using supplements I found in his closet. I explained about the medical records showing his heart was fine and the phone call where he admitted planning to trap me. I talked about his 43 calls the day I left and how he showed up at Kara's building. Rick's lawyer interrupted and said I was an ungrateful stepdaughter who abandoned a sick man who needed care. He tried to make it sound like Rick was the victim, but I had brought copies of everything. The medical records, screenshots of the weight gain supplement orders, the notebook with his plan written out. I handed them all to the judge and watched her face get harder as she read through the evidence. She looked at Rick and asked if he had anything to say. He started crying and saying he just missed me and made mistakes. The judge's expression didn't change. She wrote down exactly what I could and couldn't do, where Rick had to stay away from and what would happen if he broke the rules. Rick's lawyer stood up and tried to argue one more time about how his client needed family support for his health conditions. The judge cut him off and said the medical evidence showed his conditions were either fake or self-inflicted, and she wasn't interested in hearing more excuses. She turned to Rick and told him directly that if he came within 500 feet of me, Kara, my workplace, or the university campus, he would be arrested immediately. Rick started sobbing loudly, saying I was his only family, and he couldn't lose me too. The judge's face stayed completely blank, and she told him that manipulating and trapping someone wasn't love. It was abuse, and the court took that seriously. She warned him that any violation would result in jail time, not just a warning. Then she stamped the papers and said the order was effective immediately for 1 year. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like someone had lifted a truck off my chest. Kara squeezed my hand and I realized I was shaking, but not from fear this time. Someone with actual authority had looked at everything Rick did and said it was wrong, that I wasn't crazy or cruel for leaving. We got to the parking lot and I just stood there breathing for a minute because the air felt different somehow, lighter. Kara suggested we go out for dinner to celebrate, and I agreed even though my stomach was still twisted up. We went to a small restaurant near her apartment and she ordered us both pasta. I picked at my food at first because eating felt weird when I was this worked up. But slowly my stomach started to relax and I realized I was actually hungry. Really hungry in a way I hadn't been in weeks. I ate the entire plate of pasta and even had some bread. Kara watched me with this soft smile and said she was proud of me for fighting back. I told her I couldn't have done any of it without her help, and she got a little teary. That night I went to bed feeling good, but I woke up at 3 in the morning gasping for air. I'd been dreaming I was back in Rick's house doing laundry, and he was sitting in his chair laughing. In the dream I kept trying to leave, but every time I got to the door I was back in his room cleaning up another mess. He kept laughing and saying I'd never really get away, that the restraining order was just paper, and paper couldn't stop him. I woke up with my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I had to turn on the light and look around Kara's guest room to remind myself where I actually was. The restraining order paperwork was on my dresser and I stared at it until my breathing slowed down. I was safe. Rick couldn't get to me here. The nightmare felt so real, though, that I couldn't fall back asleep for hours. My next therapy session with Sabine was 2 days later, and I told her about the nightmare. She nodded like she'd been expecting it, and explained that nightmares and anxiety were totally normal responses to trauma. She said healing wasn't a straight line where you just got better and better every day. Sometimes you'd have bad days or bad nights even when things were going well in real life. My brain was still processing everything that happened, and nightmares were part of that process. She taught me some grounding techniques I could use when I woke up panicked, like naming 5 things I could see in the room or pressing my feet hard into the floor. We practiced separating my fear responses from actual current danger. Just because I felt scared didn't mean I was in danger right now. The restraining order was real protection, not just paper like Dream Rick said. The lawyer called me the next week while I was at work shelving books. She said she needed to tell me something important about the case. My stomach dropped because I thought maybe Rick had already violated the order or found some way around it. But she explained that based on all the evidence I'd provided about Rick's fake illness, she had a legal duty to report the disability fraud to the state benefits office. She'd already filed the report, and they'd opened an official investigation. They were going to review all of Rick's medical claims and documentation from the past 2 years. She wanted me to know before I heard about it some other way. I thanked her and hung up and then just stood there in the bookstore aisle feeling sick. Part of me knew Rick deserved to be investigated because he'd been lying and probably stealing money he wasn't supposed to get. But another part of me felt horrible, like I was the one hurting him now. I brought it up with Sabine at my next session because the guilt was eating at me. She asked me to walk through what actually happened. Rick chose to fake being sick. Rick chose to gain weight on purpose. Rick chose to apply for disability benefits he didn't need. Rick chose to trap me with lies. I didn't make him do any of those things. Reporting what he did wasn't cruel. It was necessary. She reminded me that Rick might do this to someone else if he faced no consequences. Maybe he already had before me. Protecting other people from him wasn't wrong. It was right. The guilt was just another way Rick's manipulation was still affecting me, making me feel responsible for his choices. I left that session feeling a little better, but the guilt still sat in my chest like a stone. 6 weeks after leaving Rick's house, I finally felt like I had an actual routine. I worked at the bookstore 3 days a week, saw Sabine once a week, and spent the rest of my time getting ready for school. Kara and I had easy conversations over breakfast about normal things like what we wanted for dinner or shows we were watching. She never made me feel like I owed her anything or like I was a burden. Living with her was teaching me what it felt like to share space with someone who respected boundaries and didn't need constant care. I could go to my room when I wanted to be alone and she didn't take it personally. I could say no to things without her guilt tripping me. It was so different from life with Rick that sometimes it felt unreal. An email from the university housing office arrived in late July with my dorm assignment. I was in one of the freshman dorms on the 3rd floor. My roommate's name was Jessica, and she was from a town about 2 hours away. The email included her contact info so we could introduce ourselves before move-in day. I sent her a careful message saying hi and a little about myself. She wrote back the same day and seemed totally normal and friendly. She was planning to study biology and liked hiking and reading. I felt cautiously good about it. Like maybe I could actually have a normal roommate experience instead of the disaster I was expecting. Mateo texted me a few days later asking if I wanted to meet up and explore campus together before school started. My first instinct was to say no, because the idea of making new friends after being isolated for so long felt impossible. But I remembered what Sabine said about practicing trust and putting myself out there even when it scared me. I texted back and said yes. We made plans to meet the following week and walk around campus. I was nervous about it, but also kind of excited, which was a feeling I hadn't had about social stuff in years. The weekend before our campus meetup, Kara took me shopping for dorm supplies. We went to one of those big stores with entire aisles of bedding and desk organizers. Kara pushed the cart while I picked out a comforter and sheets, some storage bins, a desk lamp. Every item felt significant somehow, like I was claiming something that should have been mine 2 years ago. I should have been doing this for MIT back then, picking out stuff for a dorm room in Massachusetts. Instead, I was doing it now for State University and trying not to think about everything I'd lost. Kara noticed me getting quiet and asked if I was okay. I told her I was trying to be present for this moment instead of stuck in the past. She said that was good, and that my mom would be proud of me for making it here at all after everything Rick put me through. I mentioned the shopping trip to Sabine at our next session, and she asked how I felt about potentially helping put Rick in prison. The question made my stomach twist because I hadn't let myself think about it that directly. I told her I felt guilty, like maybe I was being vindictive or cruel by cooperating with the investigation. She leaned forward and reminded me that I wasn't sending Rick anywhere, that his own choices and actions created these consequences, and my only responsibility was to tell the truth about what happened. She said protecting other people from him wasn't wrong. It was necessary and right. The guilt was just another way Rick's manipulation was still affecting me, making me feel responsible for his choices. I left that session feeling a little better, but the guilt still sat heavy in my chest. The call from the state benefits office came on a Tuesday morning while I was shelving books in the history section. A woman named Rena introduced herself as an investigator and asked if I could come in to give a formal statement about Rick's disability fraud case. My hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down on the floor between the shelves. I told her yes, and we scheduled it for that Friday. The next few days dragged by while I tried not to think about having to describe everything Rick did in an official statement that could send him to jail. Kara drove me to the benefits office on Friday and waited in the lobby while I went back with Rena. She was maybe 50 with kind eyes and a calm voice that made me feel slightly less terrified. We sat in a small conference room and she turned on a recorder and asked me to start from the beginning. I spent 2 hours going through everything I witnessed. The weight gain supplements hidden in his closet, the browser history about maintaining obesity for benefits, the notebook with weight goals and meal plans, the phone call where he admitted he was trapping me. Rena took notes and asked specific questions about dates and details, and her face got harder the more I talked. At the end, she turned off the recorder and told me Rick had been collecting disability payments he wasn't entitled to for almost 2 years, which could result in criminal charges for fraud. She thanked me for my courage in coming forward and said my statement would be crucial to the case. I walked out to the lobby feeling shaky and drained, and Kara took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug without asking questions. My next therapy session with Sabine was 2 days later, and I spent most of it crying about the investigation. I kept saying I felt like I was destroying Rick's life, that maybe he really was sick in some way I didn't understand, that I should have tried harder to help him instead of running away and reporting him. Sabine listened patiently, and then reminded me again that I wasn't sending Rick anywhere. His own choices and actions created these consequences. My only responsibility was to tell the truth about what happened. She asked if I thought Rick would have stopped trapping me if I'd stayed, and I admitted no. He probably would have kept me there forever. She said that meant other people needed to be protected from him too, that he'd probably done this before me and would do it again if nobody stopped him. Reporting his fraud wasn't cruel. It was preventing him from hurting someone else the same way he hurt me. I left feeling slightly less guilty, but still scared about what would happen next. 3 weeks after the benefits office interview, Rick showed up at my bookstore. I was at the register helping a customer when my manager grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back room. She pointed through the front window where Rick was struggling up the sidewalk toward our door, breathing hard and sweating. My entire body went cold. She already had her phone out calling the police, and she pushed me into the stockroom and told me to stay there. I stood behind the door with my heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I could hear my manager's voice out front telling Rick he needed to leave, that the police were coming, that he was violating a restraining order. Rick started crying and begging to see me, saying he just wanted to talk, that he was sorry. The police arrived within 5 minutes. I heard their voices and Rick sobbing, and then the sound of handcuffs clicking. An officer came to the stockroom and asked if I was okay, and I nodded even though I was shaking, so badly my teeth were chattering. They took Rick away in the police car, and I watched from the back room window feeling terrified, but also grimly satisfied that the restraining order actually had teeth. Kara called me that evening to tell me about Rick's hearing because I didn't attend. The restraining order violation meant he spent 3 days in jail and got a stern warning from the judge that the next violation would result in much longer jail time. Kara said Rick cried through the whole hearing and claimed he just wanted to apologize to me, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. She told him he'd had plenty of chances to respect boundaries, and he'd chosen to violate a court order instead. Knowing he faced real consequences helped me feel safer. Maybe he'd finally understand I was serious about staying away from him. 2 months after leaving Rick's house, I started packing for college. Kara helped me load boxes into her car on move-in day, and I actually felt excited instead of just anxious. We drove to campus with my stuff crammed in the back seat and trunk, and Kara kept glancing over at me with this proud smile. When we pulled up to my dorm, she started tearing up and told me she was proud of how hard I'd fought to get here. I hugged her tight and thanked her for taking me in when I had nowhere else to go. She said that's what family does, and it hit me that she was more family to me than Rick ever was. Move-in day at the State University was complete chaos in the best possible way. Students and parents everywhere carrying boxes and furniture, orientation leaders in bright shirts directing traffic, music playing from open dorm windows. My roommate Jessica was already there when I arrived, and she was exactly like her emails, sweet and friendly and normal. Her parents helped us both unpack, and they were kind to me without asking nosy questions about my family. Nobody treated me like I was damaged or strange, just another freshman starting college. By the end of the day, my side of the room was set up with my new bedding and desk supplies and photos, and Jessica and I stayed up late talking about our class schedules and what clubs we wanted to join. It felt surreal to be doing normal college things after everything with Rick. The first week of classes was overwhelming but good. I was behind in some ways because of my gap years, especially in math where I'd forgotten a lot of what I learned in high school. But I was also more focused and thankful than most of the other freshmen who seemed to take college for granted. Every lecture felt like something Rick had tried to steal from me, and I took notes like my life depended on remembering every word. My professors were helpful when I explained I'd taken time off, and one of them connected me with free tutoring services for students who needed extra support. I went to every single class and office hours and study session, determined not to waste this chance. Mateo found me in the library during the second week and asked if I wanted to meet his friend group. I was nervous because I hadn't really had friends in years, but I said yes. He introduced me to 4 other freshmen who immediately pulled me into their study session and invited me to eat dinner with them after. Having friends again felt strange at first, like I'd forgotten how to joke and relax around people who weren't constantly demanding things from me. But slowly over the next few weeks, I remembered. They made me laugh and included me in their plans and never made me feel weird about being quiet sometimes. One night we stayed up until 2 in the morning in the common room just talking about random stuff, and I realized I was actually happy. The state benefits office concluded their investigation in October and charged Rick with disability fraud. Kara called to tell me he'd pleaded guilty as part of a deal. He had to pay back 2 years of fraudulent benefits plus fines, which was apparently thousands of dollars. He also got probation with the threat of jail time if he violated any terms. Part of me felt guilty hearing that, but mostly I felt relieved. Maybe facing real consequences would finally make him understand what he'd done was wrong. I kept seeing Sabine weekly, even though I was doing well at college, because I knew I was still working through everything and I needed support. In one session, I told her I felt guilty about being happy while Rick faced consequences for the fraud charges. She helped me understand that my success wasn't cruel. It was justice. Rick had tried to destroy my future to serve his own needs and me thriving, despite that wasn't wrong. She reminded me that I'd lost 2 years, and my MIT acceptance because of his lies, and going to State University and building a good life here wasn't something I should feel bad about. It was what I deserved after everything he put me through. 3 months passed, and I actually felt happy. Not the fake kind where I told myself I was fine, but real happiness that came from waking up in my dorm room and choosing what to do with my day. I had friends who texted me to hang out just because they liked spending time with me. My psychology classes were hard but interesting, and I stayed after lectures to ask questions because I wanted to understand the material, not because someone needed me to explain it to them later. The bookstore gave me extra shifts during midterms, and I saved most of my paychecks in an account that only I could access. Every morning, I made my own breakfast in the dining hall and ate with people who made me laugh. Every night, I went to sleep knowing nobody would wake me up demanding help or faking a medical emergency to keep me trapped. My roommate Jessica and I decorated our room with string lights and photos from campus events. Mateo's friend group adopted me completely, and we studied together in the library most nights, taking breaks to get coffee or complain about our professors. I joined a campus organization that supported abuse survivors and started volunteering at their resource center twice a week. My hands weren't raw from bleach anymore. I slept through full nights without nightmares most of the time. I wore clothes that didn't smell like cleaning products, and I went to parties where people knew my name. This life was mine, and nobody was stealing it from me or manipulating me into giving it up. State University wasn't MIT, but it was real and good and completely mine. Parents' weekend arrived in late October, and Kara drove 6 hours to visit. I met her in the parking lot, and she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, then pulled back to look at my face. I gave her a full campus tour, showing her the psychology building where I spent most of my time, and the library study rooms where my friend group claimed the same spot every night. She met Jessica and saw our dorm room with all our decorations and the photos on my desk. We walked to the dining hall, and I introduced her to Mateo and his friends, and they all told embarrassing stories about me falling asleep in the library or getting lost trying to find my statistics classroom. Kara laughed at their jokes and asked them questions about their majors, and she fit right in with everyone. Later, we sat on a bench near the student center, and she started crying again. The happy kind where she kept smiling through the tears. She told me my mom would be so incredibly proud of me for getting out and rebuilding my entire life from nothing. She said most people who go through what I went through with Rick never escape, and the fact that I recognized the abuse and left and built this new life showed how strong my mom raised me to be. I cried too, because I missed my mom so much in that moment, wishing she could see that I was okay and happy and free. Kara stayed until Sunday afternoon, and before she left, she reminded me that her home was always mine if I needed it, but she could tell I didn't need rescuing anymore. I had rescued myself. That night, I sat at my desk after Jessica went to sleep and pulled out a blank notebook. I started writing a letter to my mom that I knew I would never send because she was gone. I told her everything about what Rick did after she died, how he faked being sick and gained all that weight on purpose and trapped me for 2 years. I wrote about finding his medical records and hearing him on the phone admitting he planned to keep me until I aged out of college programs completely. I described packing my bag and walking out his front door and blocking his number and moving in with Kara. I told her about the restraining order and the fraud charges and how Rick violated the order and got arrested. I wrote about starting at State University instead of MIT and how much that hurt at first, but how I was building something real here anyway. I thanked her for raising me to recognize when someone was hurting me on purpose, even when that person was supposed to be family. I thanked her for teaching me that I deserved better than being someone's unpaid caretaker and emotional punching bag. I told her I was studying psychology now because I wanted to help other people escape situations like mine, and that every day I spent here at college instead of trapped with Rick felt like winning. I wrote that I was scared sometimes, and I still had nightmares and bad days when the trauma caught up with me, but I was genuinely okay. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in my desk drawer where I kept important things. She couldn't read it, but writing it helped me feel like she knew anyway. Fall semester continued, and I wasn't perfect. Some mornings I woke up from nightmares about Rick showing up at my dorm or Kara's apartment. Some days I got triggered by random things like seeing someone who looked like him or hearing about family obligations in class discussions. I still went to therapy with Sabine every week because I knew I needed help processing everything. There were moments when I felt guilty about Rick facing consequences for the fraud charges, or when I wondered if I should have tried harder to help him instead of leaving. But those moments got shorter and less frequent as time passed. I was studying psychology with plans to specialize in helping people escape abusive family situations and domestic violence. Every lecture about manipulation tactics or trauma responses felt personal and important, like I was learning the language to describe what happened to me. I made Dean's List my first semester, and my professors wrote me recommendation letters for summer internship programs. I had a life that was completely mine, built from nothing after Rick tried to destroy my future. State University wasn't MIT, and that still hurts sometimes when I let myself think about it. But this was mine, and I earned it, and nobody could take it away from me. Every single day I spent here instead of trapped in that house taking care of a man who never actually needed me felt like victory. That was enough. And that's pretty much it. I could probably talk about this all day. If you picked up one useful thing here, mission accomplished.